Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehudit in South Carolina, Chaim in Florida, Lynn in Canada, Ella in Southern California, and Elise in Virginia. Also Shandora in the Bronx and Gordo in Scotland. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Michelle Terriault, in memory of those who lost their lives in the Palisades fire and for those who lost their homes and need a meal. I think at this point that's been about a year here since that happened, and so many lives were just turned upside down. We actually had some folks over for Shabbos last week who lost their homes in the Palisades fire and ended up moving to this neighborhood. So it's a beautiful dedication, Michelle. May everybody, get on track with their lives. May the memories of those who died that day, may their memories always be for a blessing. And Michelle, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And the merit of that, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen. Okay, that was Menachot 13. Okay, we're opening chapter 2 today in Tractate Menachos, the 30th volume of the Talmud. And our daf is page 13. Page 13, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 2. Mishnah 1. In the case of a priest who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to partake of its remainder or to burn its handful on the next day, which would be beyond the deadline. So what are we thinking? Piggul. So the Mishnah has an interesting way to word this now. Normally, right, there's just, if a Mishnah, usually the ruling is not attributed, an anonymous Mishnah, right, that's the law. Unattributed Mishnah, often authored by Rabbi Meir, but that would represent, right, the law and therefore the ruling of the majority. But this Mishnah goes right to, not just a sort of minority ruling, but listen to the way that it's worded. In the case of a priest who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to partake of its remainder or to burn its handful on the next day, Rabbi Yosei concedes in this instance that it is a case of piggul and he is liable to receive kares for partaking of it. Right? So that would seem to suggest that, okay, well, that's the majority ruling, and Rabbi Yosei, who's in the minority on something, agrees with the majority in the simple case. But if the priest's intent was to burn its frankincense the next day, Rabbi Yosei says the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive kares. And the rabbis say it is a case of piggul and he is liable to receive kares for partaking of the meal offering, right? Even though his intent was only to burn the frankincense portion of the meal offering or the accompanying frankincense that goes with a meal offering the next day. Now the rabbis said to Rabbi Yosei, in what manner does this differ from an animal offering? Where, if one slaughtered it with intent to sacrifice the portions consumed on the altar the next day, it is piggul. And Rabbi Yosei said to the rabbis, there is a difference. As in the case of an animal offering, its blood and its flesh and the portions of its body that are consumed on the altar are all one entity, right? They all come from the body of the animal offering. Consequently, intent with regard to any one of them renders the entire offering piggul. But the frankincense is not actually part of the meal offering. That's Mishnah 1. Now the Gemara. The Gemara questions the terminology of the Mishnah. This is why I pointed it out to you. Why do I need the Tana to teach that Rabbi Yosei concedes in this instance? Let the Tana simply state, if one removes a handful from a meal offering with the intent to partake of its remainder or to burn the handful on the next day, Rabbi Yosei says that the offering is piggul and one is liable to receive kares for partaking of the remainder. So the Gemara answers, it was necessary for the Tana, who formulated our Mishnah, to teach that Rabbi Yosei concedes because he wants to teach the latter clause of the Mishnah, that if his intent was only to burn its frankincense the next day, in that case, Rabbi Yosei says the meal offering is unfit, but one who eats of it would not be subject to kares because it was not rendered piggul, right? It was unfit, but not piggul. So the Gemara responds, it was necessary for the Tana to teach I just read that. Okay. And the Gemara elaborates. The reason that the Tana links the two cases of the Mishnah is lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yosei does not render the meal offering piggul is because he holds that one cannot render an offering piggul with intent that concerns only half of its permitting factors. Right? Remember, permitting factors is like, in the case of an animal offering, that the blood has to be collected by a priest, conveyed to the altar, and sprinkled on the altar. And then, if there are edible portions of the offering, like a peace offering or a sin offering, those edible portions become edible once the permitting factors have been carried out correctly. So, in the case of a meal offering, what are the permitting factors? Removing the handful correctly, conveying it to the altar in a service vessel, and burning it on the altar. That's one of them. And there is the frankincense that accompanies a meal offering, and that also has to be burned on the altar, right? So the reason that Tana links the two cases of the Mishnah is, lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yosei does not render the meal offering piggul is because he holds that one cannot render an offering piggul with intent that concerns only half of its permitting factors. And consequently, since the burning of the handful and the frankincense render the remainder of a meal offering permitted for consumption, then even in the first clause of the Mishnah, where one intends to burn the handful the next day, Rabbi Yosei should hold that the offering is not rendered piggul, as the intent does not refer to the frankincense as well. The intent was only worded with respect to the handful. So you might have thought that Rabbi Yosei is not going to render the offering piggul unless the priest had an intent to consume or burn beyond its time both the handful and the frankincense, and that's not what Rabbi Yosei rules. He agrees that if the priest had in mind to consume or to burn the handful, or the remainder for that matter, the next day, then it is piggul, and if he partakes of any of the meal offering, that would be kares. But if he only had intent to burn the frankincense the next day, that's going to render the offering unfit, but not piggul, and therefore if one ate from it, it would not be a kares penalty. Now we're on page 13b. So therefore, the Tana who formulated the Mishnah teaches us that in this case, Rabbi Yosei concedes that if the handful is removed with the intent to burn only the handful on the next day, the offering is rendered piggul. So accordingly, Rabbi Yosei holds that one renders an offering piggul with intent that concerns only half of its permitting factors, and the offering is not rendered piggul in the case of the latter clause for a different reason, as the Gemara will discuss later. Not the fact that not all of the permitting factors he had an intent to consume beyond or burn beyond the deadline, there must be some other reason why an intent with respect to the frankincense to burn it on the altar beyond its deadline is going to render the offering unfit, but not piggul. And we don't know what that reason is yet. Although the Mishnah did seem to imply that there was something disconnected between the meal offering and the frankincense as compared to the different parts of an animal offering that all come from the animal. Okay, so the Mishnah teaches that if one removed a handful from a meal offering with intent to burn its frankincense on the next day, right? At the time that he took the handful, he was thinking, I'm going to burn the frankincense that accompanies this meal offering beyond its deadline, right? On the next day. In that situation, Rabbi Yosei says the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive charis. So concerning this, Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Yosei would say, i.e., this is Rabbi Yosei's reasoning, a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor piggul. In other words, if while performing the rites of a permitting factor, taking the handful, one had intent to perform the rites of a different permitting factor outside its designated time, right? He had thought in his mind that while he's taking the handful, he's thinking, I'm going to burn the frankincense beyond its deadline. Then, according to Rabbi Yosei, the offering is not rendered piggul on account of this intent. And Reish Lakish adds, and you would say the same with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense of the showbread, right? So the showbreads were the 12 showbreads that sat on the shulchan, the table, special table, in the sanctuary, either in the times of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or in the times of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. In the sanctuary, there were these 12 showbreads that would remain miraculously warm all week, warm and fresh. And then on Shabbos, and there were 2 bowls of frankincense on that table with the showbreads. And then on Shabbos, they would bring in 2 new bowls of frankincense and 12 new loaves of showbread, and they would take off the old ones, the 2 bowls of frankincense and the 12 old loaves, and carry them out of the sanctuary, and they would put the new bowls of frankincense and the 12 new loaves on the table. And those breads that were taken off the table are for the priests to eat. The priests were serving the temple that week, but they can't eat those breads until those 2 bowls of frankincense that are removed from the table get burned on the mizbeach, on the external altar, not the little incense altar in the sanctuary, but the main altar in the courtyard of the holy temple. So those 2 bowls of frankincense act as the permitting factors for the consumption of the showbreads. Okay, why are we talking about that? Reish Lakish adds, excuse me, and you would say the same with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense of the showbread, that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor piggul, and therefore, if the priest burned one of the bowls with the intent to burn the other bowl the next day, the showbread would not be rendered piggul. And the Gemara asks, what is the purpose of the apparently superfluous statement, and you would say the same with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense? Is there a reason to assume that Rabbi Yosei would hold that the showbread is rendered piggul in such a case? And the Gemara responds that it is necessary to say this, lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yosei holds there is no piggul in the case of the frankincense is because it is not of the same type as the meal offering. But with regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense on the table in the sanctuary, which are of the same type as each other, one might say that they do render one another piggul. Therefore, Reish Lakish teaches us that in both instances, one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor piggul. Now the Gemara asks, and can you say that the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yosei in the case of the frankincense in the Mishnah is not due to the fact that the frankincense is not of the same type as the meal offering? But isn't it taught in the latter clause of the Mishnah that the rabbi said to Rabbi Yosei, in what manner does the frankincense differ from the animal offering? Where if one slaughtered it with the intent to sacrifice the portions which are consumed by the altar on the next day, it is piggul. And Rabbi Yosei said to the rabbis, There is a difference, as in the case of an animal offering, its blood and its flesh and the portions of the animal that are consumed on the altar are all one entity. But the frankincense is not part of the meal offering. And the Mishnah indicates that according to Rabbi Yosef, the reason the meal offering is not piggul is because the frankincense is not of the same type as the meal offering. So the Gemara explains, what does Rabbi Yosef mean when he says that the frankincense is not part of the meal offering? He means that it is not part of the preclusion of the meal offering. And the Gemara explains, this means that the law is not that just as the handful precludes the remainder, i.e. that as long as the handful has not been burned on the altar, the remainder may not be consumed, so too the handful precludes the frankincense from being burned on the altar. Rather, right, so you might have thought that you can't burn the frankincense on the altar until you burned the handful on the altar. You might have thought that, but you'd be wrong. Rather, if the priest wants, he burns this first, and if he wants, he burns that first. I.e., he may burn the frankincense before or after the burning of the handful. Accordingly, the frankincense is an independent permitting factor. And for this reason, intent with regard to the frankincense that occurred during the removal of the handful does not render a meal offering piggul, according to Rabbi Yosef. The Gemara asks, well, what about the rabbis who say that the meal offering is rendered piggul in such a case? What are they basing their opinion on? So the Gemara answers, they hold that when we say that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor piggul, this is with regard to the case taught in a Mishnah that we will encounter on page 16, concerning one who slaughtered one of the lambs whose sacrifice permits the consumption of the two loaves of the two loaves of the meal offering brought on Shavuos, with the intent to partake of the other lamb the next day. Right? So what this is all about is split intention with regard to two units that normally come together. So the Gemara explains, when you said in the Mishnah that both permitting factors are fit, this statement applies only where they were not fixed in one vessel. But in a situation where they were fixed in one vessel, as is the case with regard to the handful and the frankincense, they are considered like one unit, and therefore they do render one another piggul. Now, with regard to the frankincense, Rabbi Yanai says, the collection of the frankincense from a meal offering, when performed by a non-priest, is not valid, and it would disqualify the meal offering. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, it is because the rite of conveying has touched it, i.e. the collection of the frankincense is considered part of the rite of conveying of the frankincense to the altar for the purpose of burning it. And even if the non-priest simply collected the frankincense and thereafter transferred it to a priest, Rabbi Yanai holds that conveying, even without moving one's leg, is still called conveying. He's part of the chain. And the law is that the performance of the rite of conveying by a non-priest is not valid. Rab Mari said, we learned this law in the Mishnah on 12a, which discusses those sacrificial rites of a meal offering during which improper intent renders an offering piggul as well. The Mishnah teaches, this is the principle in the case of anyone who removes the handful or places the handful in the vessel, or who conveys the vessel with the handful to the altar, or who burns the handful on the altar, with intent to partake of an item whose typical manner is that one partakes of it, or to burn an item whose typical manner is such that one burns it on the altar. And he had in mind to do this outside its designated area. The meal offering is unfit, but there is no liability for kares. If his intent was to perform any of those actions beyond their designated time, the offering is piggul, and one who ate of it would be liable to kares, provided that the permitting factor, i.e. the handful, was sacrificed in accordance with its mitzvah, right? If there were compounded errors, piggul plus something else went wrong in bringing the handful to the altar, then piggul would not apply. Now, Rab Mari analyzes the first part of this Mishnah. Granted, the removal of the handful from a meal offering is the same as i.e. equivalent to the slaughter of animal offerings. The conveying of the handful to the altar in order to burn it is also akin to the conveying of the blood of a slaughtered offering to the altar in order to sprinkle it. And similarly, the burning of the handful and the frankincense of a meal offering is comparable to the sprinkling of the blood of a slaughtered offering upon the altar. But as for placing the handful in the service vessel, what rite is he performing that is comparable to a rite of slaughtered offerings? If we say that the meal offering is piggul because the placing of the handful into a vessel is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering into a service vessel, which would sound like, wouldn't that be the comparison you want to make? But then if you say that, one can ask, are these rites in fact comparable? There, in the case of the animal offering, the blood enters the vessel by itself. Whereas here, the priest takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it into the vessel. His force is necessary. He's not just holding the service vessel there while the animal bleeds into it. He has to actually place the handful into the service vessel. So rather, it must be due to the following reason. Since it is not possible to sacrifice the handful without first performing the act of placing it in a vessel, the placement of the handful in a vessel is considered a significant rite. And perforce, this factor causes it to be considered like the collection of the blood. Well, here too, with regard to the collection of the frankincense, since it is not possible to sacrifice the frankincense without first performing the act of collecting it from the vessel, the collection of the frankincense is a significant rite that perforce causes it to be considered like the rite of conveying. Nice analogy, says the Gemara, and rejects it. No, this is not the reason, and one cannot prove from the Mishnah that the collection of the frankincense from a meal offering performed by a non-priest is not valid. Actually, the reason why intent during the placement of the handful renders the offering piggul is in fact because it is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering. And as for the difficulty that you raise, that there the blood enters the vessel by itself, whereas here he takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it into the vessel, this is not a true difficulty. And the Gemara explains, now consider both of them, i.e. the collection of the blood and the placing of the handful, both involve the sanctity of a vessel, in which a service vessel sanctifies a permitting factor to the altar, either the handful from a meal offering or the blood from a slaughtered offering. What difference is it to me if the permitting factor enters the vessel by itself or whether one takes the item and casts it into the vessel? And there, the discussion ends. And we complete our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 2. Then we move on to Mishnah number 2. It's going to be a short class today. If one slaughtered the 2 lambs that accompany the 2 meal offering loaves that are sacrificed on Shavuos, with the intent to partake of one of the 2 loaves the next day, right? Split intention with respect to time, where there's 2 items that come as a unit, and he had intent to consume only one of them beyond its time. Will we say that the whole offering is thus rendered piggul or not? That's the question. Let me read that again. If one slaughtered the 2 lambs that accompany the 2 meal offering loaves that are sacrificed on Shavuos, with the intent to partake of one of the 2 loaves the next day, or if one burned the 2 bowls of frankincense that accompany the showbread with the intent to partake of one of the arrangements of the showbread the next day, Rabbi Yosei says that loaf and that arrangement of which he intended to partake the next day, they are piggul, and one is liable to receive kares for their consumption. But the second loaf and the arrangement are unfit, but there is no liability to receive kares for their consumption, rendered unfit, but not piggul. That's Rabbi Yosef's opinion. And the rabbis say this loaf and arrangement and that loaf and arrangement are both piggul, and one is liable to receive kares for their consumption. So if the 2 items come as a unit, having an intent to consume one of them beyond its time is not going to render it cars. Elon, take this call in case it's the garage people. So Rav Nachman. No, wait. Okay, so that was the Mishnah. That's Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 2. Now the Gemara. Rav Huna says, Rabbi Yosei would say, in accordance with his opinion, that intent of piggul with regard to one loaf or one arrangement does not render the second loaf or arrangement piggul. That if one had intent of piggul with regard to the right thigh, i.e. he slaughtered an offering with intent to partake of the right thigh on the next day, then the left thigh has not become piggul, and one is not liable to receive kares for its consumption. And what is the reason for this? If you wish, propose a logical argument, and if you wish, cite a verse. Now, doesn't this seem kind of crazy? You're saying that an animal offering, which is slaughtered, like if you had intent with respect to eat one limb of the animal beyond its time, that limb is going to be rendered piggul, but the other limb won't? Aren't they both attached to the same animal? Well, not necessarily, because that animal is going to be cut up, right? Even in the case of an olah, of a burnt offering, by the time that the flesh of that animal reaches the altar, it has been cut up into pieces. Right? And so why should one piece, an intent with respect to one piece, render all of the animal piggul? Maybe it doesn't, because they've already been separated. So let's see. So if you wish, propose a logical argument why intent with respect to one limb won't render the entire slaughtered offering piggul. If you wish, propose a logical argument. Disqualifying intent is no stronger than an incident of tuma, of ritual impurity. And if one limb of an offering became tameh, now can that limb become tameh while the animal's alive? No, it's only after the animal is dead, and presumably it's been butchered, it's been cut up. Right? And if one limb of an offering became tameh, did the entire offering then become tameh? Accordingly, one limb can be rendered piggul without the other. And if you wish, cite a verse that addresses piggul, quote, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity, Leviticus 7:18. The verse indicates that one who eats specifically of it from one part shall bear his iniquity, not one who eats from the other part of the offering, again, presumably after it's been cut up. So Rav Nachman raised an objection to Rav Huna from a baraisa. And the rabbis say that there is never liability to receive kares for partaking of the 2 loaves unless one has intent of piggul with regard to the minimum measure, an olive bulk, a ketzayis, of both of them. Right? He has to have an intent to eat from these 2 loaves, at least a minimum measure of both of them, in order for both of them to be rendered piggul, according to this baraisa, which seems to contradict our Mishnah, where intent to eat one of the loaves beyond its time would render both loaves piggul. I.e., one's intent renders both loaves piggul only if he slaughters the lamb with the intent to consume an amount equal to an olive bulk from both loaves combined beyond their proper time. So one can infer from this that if he had intent with regard to both of them, yes, both loaves are piggul. But if his intent was with regard to only one of the loaves, no, the other loaf is not piggul. Rav Nachman continues, in accordance with whose opinion is this baraisa? If we say that it is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis of the Mishnah, then even if his intent was with regard to only one of them, both loaves are rendered piggul. So rather, it is obvious that the baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. So now, granted, if you say that according to Rabbi Yosei, the left and the right thighs of an offering are considered one body, and consequently piggul intent with regard to one thigh renders the other thigh piggul as well, then due to that reason, it is understandable that if the piggul intent was for an amount equal to one total olive bulk from both of the loaves, then the intent with regard to each loaf is combined with the other. But if you say, and now we're at the top of page 14a, and I'm almost done, questions or comments, please get them in now. But if you say that Rabbi Yosei holds that the right and left thighs of an offering are considered 2 distinct bodies, and therefore piggul intent with regard to one does not render the other piggul, Then, in the case of the 2 loaves, would the intentions concerning both loaves combine to render both piggul? And Rav Huna responds, one cannot infer anything from this baraisa with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, as in accordance with whose opinion is this baraisa? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi, i.e. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as it is taught in another baraisa with regard to one who slaughters one of the lambs brought as a peace offering on Shavuos with the intent to consume half an olive bulk from this loaf the next day, right? Combining minimum measures to form a piggul intent, but combining a minimum measure from the loaf with a minimum measure from the lamb, right? Brought as a peace offerings on Shavuos with intent to consume half an olive bulk from this loaf of the next day, and similarly, he slaughtered the other lamb with intent to consume half an olive bulk from that second loaf the next day. In this case, Rebbe says, I say that this offering is valid, as his intentions do not combine, because he's not going to combine half an olive bulk, that's less than the minimum measure. So if you combine 2 half olive bulks, then you would have a minimum measure. But if one is coming from the bread and one is coming from the lamb, and his intent is to consume those half olive bulks beyond the designated time, those 2 things don't combine together because they're too different from each other. Even though they're parts of the offering, one is bread, one is meat, and he's not going to combine them. Rav Huna continues, it may be inferred that the reason why the priest's intentions do not combine is that his intent was said with regard to a half and a half, i.e. he slaughtered each lamb with the intent to consume half an olive bulk from one loaf the next day. But if he said during the slaughter of each of the lambs that he is slaughtering it with the intent to consume an olive bulk from both of them, then the halves would combine to render the offering piggul. I'm thinking that I might have made a mistake. He wasn't talking about eating a piece of the lamb beyond its time. It's that he's combining the loaves, a half olive bulk from each of the loaves. So there, it's almost surprising that we wouldn't combine them. They're separate loaves, but they're very much the same type of offering, and they're coming as a unit. However, the intent was formulated with respect to one loaf while he's slaughtering one of the lambs, and with respect to the other loaf while he's slaughtering one of the other lambs. So you can see the sages arguing about whether they're going to combine or not. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let's check out a few questions. Ooh. Okay, so first of all, Sharon, I apologize. Didn't see your questions yesterday. So she says, one is a question from my husband. Why does the petitioner, who is trying to correct something, and the priest makes an error, end up worse than when he started? That's such a good question. Right? Who is having this intent? Not the owner of the offering, who maybe is bringing a sin offering because he's atoning for an unwitting violation of a Karas-bearing prohibition. Okay, he's trying to do the right thing, make his atonement. And then the priest messed up, right? And we've had this question before. If the priest messes up, okay, the offering is unfit. If it's the type of mess up, if it's a sin offering, and the priest had an intent, with the wrong kind of offering, then that offering doesn't go to the altar at all, not even as a gift offering. Certainly, either way, is not for any offering. If the priest has the wrong intent, it's not going to satisfy his obligation, whether it's the meal offering of a sinner or a vow offering, whatever it is. The priest is the one who messed up, but now the owner has to bring another offering. Does the owner have to pay for that offering? Maybe it was very expensive for him. He's a poor person, and it cost him to bring this sin offering. Is there some kind of a fund at the Holy Temple to pay for these replacement offerings when it's the priest who messed it up? I don't know. I still don't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't be surprised if, that fund of communal gift offerings might fund the replacement in such a case. It's just that we haven't asked that question, right? The question has simply been, is it rendered unfit or not? And how unfit is it, right? But so the question is, like, this person didn't make a mistake. The priest did. Why is he now worse off than he was before? I don't have a better answer. But I am reminded of a joke that I heard, and I'm going to really butcher this joke, and I should never tell a joke I don't know well. But it's not even really a Jewish joke. It's an engineering joke. Right? And a guy's like in a balloon, and he's lost. So he decreases his altitude, so he gets closer to the ground, and there's a guy on the ground. And so the guy in the balloon says, "Where am I?" And the guy on the ground says, "Well, you're at 130 degrees east longitude and 20 degrees north latitude." Right? And I think that's right. And the guy in the balloon says, "You must be an engineer." And the guy on the ground says, "How did you know?" He says, "Well, because you give me a complicated answer, and that doesn't help me at all to try to get to where I'm going." And the engineer says, "Well, you must be in management." And the guy in the balloon says, "How did you know?" And the guy in the ground says, "Because you were in trouble. You asked me for help. I gave you the best information I could. And now you're still in the same situation you were in before, but now it's my fault." Somebody knows that joke better than me could tell it better. Okay, Sharon's other question. At times, a grain offering is from a poor person. Why should they be penalized and have to be further burdened by having to bring another offering if there is an error of poor intention of the priest? I think I addressed that question too in my answer to the first. I wish I had a better answer so that I would know better, because really all we've studied so far is what renders an offering unfit or not. But if it's the priest who makes the error, what really happens to the one bringing the offering? Are we going to say that, well, it wasn't their fault, they're going to have to bring another offering, and that means that they're going to have to be in Jerusalem another day? I mean, there could be all kinds of ramifications of the priest messing up the offering. Maybe the poor person, didn't have the budget to stay at an inn in Jerusalem for the extra day or 2 days or 3 days before this thing could be replaced and brought properly. Who knows? And so we would hope that there's some kind of a fund at the Holy Temple that would cover, these offerings that were messed up by the priests and their faulty intention. And also remember that it only would be disqualified because the priest had a wrong idea in his head at the time that he's bringing the offering or conveying it, sprinkling, etc. There would be some kind of, you could easily imagine that a priest would say, "Oh, I had the wrong intention. This guy's poor. I don't want to mess him up. I'll keep my mouth shut." Right? But he had to speak up. It was important that he speak up. The law is that he has to speak up. And we hope that he did. And so maybe, there's that fund that we're talking about. Or maybe there's not. And maybe the fact that the priest messed it up, it's like the one bringing the offering, Hashem arranged for him to have an additional piece of bad luck, so to speak, right? It was destined for him that not only does he have to bring an offering, that it's difficult to bring an offering, but it's going to be further complicated, be made more difficult because the priest messed up. But perhaps that's what this person needed in order to really make the teshuvah that he has to make. Because remember, a sin offering is brought and you're making a teshuvah, you're making an atonement, and maybe just paying for an offering, bring it to the temple, priest takes it away, and then reports back, "Okay, we sprinkled the blood, you're good." And then he walks away. Maybe he needed more than that for his atonement process. And there's definitely a modern, very relevant application to this, to our lives. Very often we come to the realization that we've been behaving badly. We've done the wrong thing. We treated somebody badly. We were selfish. We weren't careful enough in our business to make sure that the accounting was exactly right. Who knows? And then you decide, I'm gonna change my ways. I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna be more patient, more generous, more present, whatever it is that a person is working on. And now it's like, okay, I'm getting myself on track. I want to come closer to God. I want to come closer to my people. I want to come closer to Torah. I want to get right with the Lord. right? I think that's kind of a saying that people have used. And does everything then get better? Very often, when we embark on an atonement, things get worse, sometimes much worse. That's part of that atonement process. Sometimes that's needed and necessary for a person to really make an atonement for all the things that were going wrong before he embarked on that atonement journey. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Saturday, after Shabbos ends in LA. I think last week I got on at about 7:25, 7:30, be something like that, maybe 7:35 this week, Pacific time. May we go into Shabbos and experience Shabbos and come out of Shabbos hearing only good news. We say Amen. All the best. Good Shabbos.